Right, so we got our cars, tables, and our buildings all set up in 3D space. Our next step is going to be setting up our street and sidewalk layers. What we actually want to do is we want to select our street and sidewalk layer and just delete it, get rid of it. It was useful for realigning our cars and making sure that they were in the same spot again, but now that we have that set up, we're going to rebuild this whole street and sidewalk using solid shapes. So to start with, you're going to go up by making a new solid layer by going to Layer, New, Solid, or hitting Command Y. We're going to call it Street. I'm going to choose either black or really dark gray. And it should be 1920 by 1080 should fill the screen. So you can just click Make Comp Size, and that'll make it 1920 by 1080 if it's not already. And click OK. Now what we want to do is we want to select our street layer, turn on its 3D switch, hit R to get the rotation property, and since we're going to be orienting it in a different direction, we can use the orientation property. So we want to rotate it along this axis, which is our x-axis. So if you think of an invisible line, that's going to spin along that line. So in our orientation, we're going to be changing the value of this first one, and we want to rotate it flat, so that would be 90 degrees. So we'll type 90 in for the first value, and you'll see that it gets flattened out on our screen. So if you still have your top view set up, that's great. You should be able to see it right like this. And you may notice it's a little bit weird because before, when we were working this top view, the blue arrow was pointing this direction. Now it's the green arrow. The reason for that is if you look up here, if you've got a 3D layer selected and you have your selection tool enabled, you should see these three icons. They let you change how the axis works. And it's not going to affect the way the position property works, because watch what happens when I pull my Y down. You can see that it's actually changing my Z number instead of my Y number. It just affects the way that these handles show up. The default one is to put it on local axis mode, which means that the arrows will rotate with the layer. You can also change it to world axis mode, and that'll give you the actual axis that you're on. And then there's a view axis mode, which will change based on what camera you're looking at. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave mine on local axis mode, but this is something useful if you think you're going to get into more 3D in the future. It can be very helpful for making sure that you pull something out at the right angle without having to figure out a lot of math to kind of balance out that angle. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to take our street and we want to slide it so that the back of the street is just a little bit behind our cars. And our cars layer is this bottom one right here. I know it's hard to understand them as these purple-y lines, but just remember that whatever's at the bottom right here is going to be closest to the camera. And since the cars are closest to the camera, they're going to be at the bottom. So I'm going to take my layer, I'm going to pull down on that handle, and I just want to go a little bit behind that. So you want to leave a little bit of a gap. Now, we also need to lower it, and it may make sense at first to think, oh, you know, I can just lower it in this active camera view because we're seeing the front of it, but the problem with that is we're getting a little bit of perspective. So we need to use what's called the front orthographic view, which is going to look very similar to our active camera because it's still going to be shooting from the same direction, but it's going to strip off that perspective and it's going to make it so that you can actually align this to the bottom of the tires. So leave your orthographic view selected and switch from top to front. Okay. And this really highlights the difference between a 3D view, which is like your camera views and your custom views, and the 2D orthographic views. See, the cars look like they're a lot higher up, and that's because there's no perspective adjusting the way that they look. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my street and I'm just going to pull it down so that it aligns to the bottom of the tires. You can go kind of close in if you need to. And you can also use the arrow keys on your keyboard if you want to nudge it up and down. But try to get it aligned so it's right on the bottom of those tires. And you can see that would have been really hard to understand here since we've got the thing kind of sloping down like this. Okay. So our street's all set up. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make our sidewalk from this. So I'm going to take my street layer and hit Command D to duplicate it because I want it to start in the same spot. we're going to use what I like to call the clamshell technique to do this. Think about the way that your laptop would open up if you have a laptop. You know how it hinges in the back and it kind of rotates up? That's going to be the same thing that we're going to be doing with this. We're going to be changing where the rotation of this is, and we're going to lock it to that back edge. We're just going to rotate it up, and that means that the two layers will stay aligned on that edge much better. It'll be easier to deal with. But first things first, we need to change this into a lighter gray color because our sidewalk is going to be as dark as our street. So I'm going to select my top street layer here, the new one that I just made. Go to Layer, Solid Settings, or Command-Shift-Y. I'm going to rename it Sidewalk and give it a color, a lighter gray. Then you're going to click New, and that'll automatically replace with that, but it'll leave everything in place. Now what we have to do is we have to move the anchor point back here. We want to make sure that it gets locked right onto that point. So grab your anchor point tool again, and make sure that you have snapping turned on. Now for snapping to work, you have to grab it from the center of the anchor point. You can't use these handles right here. So you got to go right in that crosshair. You're going to click and drag up until it snaps into place like that. Okay. And that'll allow it to align right to that point right there. Now you're going to select your sidewalk layer, hit R to get your rotation properties, and set your orientation back to being 0. And that'll cause the sidewalk to flip up, making this gigantic wall. Now this is way, way bigger than what we need, so we're going to have to scale it down a little bit. And there's two different ways to do this, and I'll show you both ways. So one way is by taking your selection tool and then grabbing this point right here. And you got to be really careful that you're grabbing the point and you're not to squash it and you're not actually moving the layer. So I'm going to click on the point and pull down, and you want to align it to be the same point or at the same place as the bottom of these buildings, which is going to be hard to do zoomed out. So then you're going to have to zoom in and then make adjustments. Now when you make adjustments, be very careful. If you go too close to the center, you'll see that Y pop up, and that's going to shift the layer, and that's not what you want because then the sidewalk and the street are going to come apart. So make sure you go right along the edge of it. Just pull up a little bit to align it. Okay. If you're having too much trouble getting that to work, you can also just adjust the values of the scale. So I'm going to select my sidewalk, press S to get my scale, unconstrain your proportions, that way you can only affect the Y, and just lower your Y until it goes to the right spot, which should be around 2 or 3 maybe. And it might even have a point value, but it looks like 2's working pretty good for what I need. It looks like it's aligned to the bottom of these buildings and everything. All right, now that we've got our sidewalk working, we're going to duplicate that, and we're going to make the top of our sidewalk as well in the same exact way. So we're going to select our sidewalk, Command D. It's going to stay the same color, so we don't have to replace it with another solid. And then we're going to take our anchor point tool again. And it's going to be tempting to do it from this view right here. Pull it up just like that, but avoid doing that. The reason I say that is because it can accidentally snap to the bottom of your front buildings or the bottom of your back buildings, or even the anchor point for your tables instead. So I would actually use the camera view for this one and just slide it up until it snaps into place right there. That way we can for sure see that it's on the right spot. You can see that it matches over here as well. Let me show you what I'm talking about for the other one. So sometimes, well, it's working fine now, but sometimes it'll snap into something else. Which doesn't look like it's causing a problem with mine, but it just depends on where the alignment of your buildings and stuff are. So it's always, and it takes a little bit of getting used to, like when you want to use the orthographic view to snap things in place versus when you want to use a camera or a 3D view to do it. But just make sure that if whichever one you use, that it is in the right edge whenever you snap it on. Otherwise, the pieces are going to start coming apart. Right, so it looks like we got it in place now. Once again, we're going to select our sidewalk, hit R to get our rotation, and switch this back to being 90 degrees. I'm just going to flip it back and aim it towards the back buildings. I'm going to switch this view to be my top view. And then I'm going to grab my scale property. Once again, make sure that your scale is unconstrained, so you're just affecting the Y. And you just want to increase it until it reaches that back line, or it can even go a little bit further. Right, so we've actually got our whole 3D set set up. Next thing we're going to be doing is adding a camera in. If you'd like to kind of see what your 3D set looks like in a 3D view, what you can do is select your orthographic view and switch to one of your custom views. That'll give you a good look at your 3D view. And then you can grab this camera tool right here, the unified camera tool. Left click will allow you to pan around it or orbit around it. Right click will allow you to zoom in and zoom out. And then middle click, which I don't have on my mouse, would actually allow you to move the set around, kind of like a camera pan.